It's Thursday, October 2nd. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, we are talking about provincial election issues, from what the campaigns are talking about to what's not getting a lot of attention, but all of it will matter to you, your communities, and to this province of ours. All right, folks, we've got a full studio once again. We will make a couple of calls too. And as the show goes, as you're listening to us, if you're thinking about election issues, if there's something that you think deserves more attention, something that is not being discussed, maybe discussed too much, you name it, text us 709-327-8206. Email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. And what I can do is, if we get one or two like I did yesterday during the panel, I can pepper them in through the conversation because there's my brain, but then there's all of your brains, and then it can add a lot, obviously, to the conversation. Here with me in studio today, AnnMarie Boudreau, CEO Board of Trade, is back. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me in.
Thanks for coming in. Jessica McCormick is here, President, NL Federation of Labor. How are you doing?
I'm good, Adam.
Kelly Blidook, Memorial University Political Science Prof. Welcome back.
Good to see you.
And first-timer, Blair Long, Memorial University Economics Prof. How are you?
I am well. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for coming in. When it's provincial election season, I'm just like each of you will have a different thing or things that you've been thinking of. So let's leap off there of in provincial election season, what are the things that are kind of top of mind? Professor Blidook, if you want to start.
Sure. So not to be a broken record, I usually try to think about democracy and how we're approaching it and what we're doing to make it better. So a key weakness for me, usually when we go into elections, is just seeing parties talking about this. We've seen, at least in this election, the NDP has talked about changing campaign finance. This is something that has been on the agenda, I would say, since Dwight Ball 10 years ago, and the Liberals basically suggesting that we would see some kind of democratic reforms and so on. So for me, these are things I would like to see more of, not just campaign finance, but just different things that we can do to enhance what we have. And then I guess beyond that, it's the question of, what are parties actually offering and how much do they differ? And are we offering real choices, or are we kind of going down paths that are already sort of predetermined? And I think there's a tendency, I've said before, I think there's a tendency, especially with and this isn't to single out the NDP as good or the PCs and Liberals as bad or anything like that, but simply that the two major parties often tend to align on a lot of things. They show images of trying to be different, but I feel like what we end up at the end of the day is very minor differences, and people are then sort of choosing things that I think are largely similar and just choosing which color they'd like to put on it. That's and I'd say that's still kind of my thinking of what I'm looking at in this election too.
A lot of times with Newfoundland and Labrador, and this is me trying to think about my old undergrad poli-sci brain, but I remember learning in a lot of talk, especially media, of this being such a leader-driven spot, right, over the years. What are you seeing? Are you seeing any of that this time around?
I mean, so it's hard to kind of distinguish that from other provinces and the federal scene. I think we've gotten to a point where the leaders play such a central role. I mean, if you were to look at Newfoundland and Labrador and say, oh, we're so leader-centered, but look at the previous Canadian election, that's different. It's not.
Yeah.
The stories are about the leaders. I guess the one thing I would say, and this isn't meant to be, I'm not trying to slag anybody or anything. I just think that the leaders we have right now are kind of underspoken, are not particularly charismatic, and they don't stand out. So you might even say it's a little but it's still the coverage is about the leaders. Where are the leaders on today? Where are they tomorrow? What are they talking about that day? Who came and talked to them? There's very little attention to candidates beyond that. I know that, for example, CBC will have a quick story of here's who's running in this riding, and they'll kind of show each of the...
Yeah, and you might give them, like I did this, we might give them 90 seconds or something, and it's like, blah, 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 this is what we're going to do. Sure.
And it's good, and that's important to do, and I'd like to see more of it. But really, on the whole, the coverage is about the leaders, and the leaders get to define what it's about, and then once the election is done, that person will be in charge, and they will tell people what they're going to do, and it is very centered around sort of one person and their team, right? It's got very little to do with our individual representatives, and that's unfortunate, and that's something I would like to see as well if we're talking about more things that should happen, right?
So. All right. Thank you. Jesse McCormick, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I represent 70,000 workers across the province. So in this election, I'm looking for details on how the parties will support working people in Newfoundland and Labrador. And to Kelly's point, we've been talking a lot about engaging with local candidates. If you're somebody who's working in manufacturing or in the service industry or in the fishery, you probably have a connection with your local MHA. They're the ones that are going to walk around the grocery store with you after the election is over. So really engaging them in some of the issues that we're putting forward through our election campaign is going to be important to us. I feel like there's a bit of low energy around this provincial election. That's kind of what I've been observing as a fellow poli-sci graduate. But I think that this is a really important provincial election for us. There's a lot at stake, some big issues on the horizon around the MLU, for example. I'm sure we'll talk about that, Adam. These nation-building projects and where Newfoundland and Labrador fits into the federal landscape, and issues around affordability and the cost of living. So we're at a critical time, and I think it's important for people to really push the candidates on what the details are, not just sound bites, but what they are going to do to make life better for working people in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Yeah, we've talked a lot on the show about, because all the different shows we do, one of the things that I keep bringing up, it's that there are people knocking at your doors, right? We are, municipal elections today, next week in St. John's, and with the provincial election coming, before that, the federal election. You will get people at your doors, and there's a chance that you can engage with them about issues that matter to you, to send some messages, or ask questions, get clarity, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and there's a lot of new candidates. We've seen a bit of a turnover with the governing Liberals. There's a lot of new faces on the ballot, and we got to get to know who those folks are if they're going to be representing us.
Totally. Like, who are you? What are you about? What do you think? What do you think of your party's policies? Are there differences? Is there daylight? Blair Long, what about yourself?
Okay, so I guess from the perspective of an economist, the big issue that the country is facing, as well as the province, is relatively low productivity growth. And so productivity, of course, is the most fundamental determinant of wages. And so it maps directly to the cost of living. It maps directly to the government's debt problem, in the sense that, more debt or more debt servicing costs will lead to less money available for critical investments like infrastructure, education, and so forth. It is going to definitely be fairly consequential for the way whichever party forms government deals with the trade-off between a prosperous oil and gas industry versus our environmental objectives going forward. And so I think I've had this conversation kind of informally with a few people on campus and sort of socially. The big economic issue facing Canada is productivity. It's not so much what the impact of tariffs from the U.S. will be. It's not so much whether or not a recession is coming around the corner. The biggest problem the country and thus the province is facing is the productivity slowdown. And so I would hope that from a policy-making perspective, whoever forms government will kind of have that at the tippity top of their agenda.
What changes productivity?
So the key determinants usually we think of as being, the big one would be investment in physical capital, and so particularly the amount of capital per worker. And so that's why things like mining, oil and gas, these industries have really high productivity, and it's actually why Newfoundland and Labrador is a relatively high productivity province within Canada. The others would be Alberta and Saskatchewan. They're all oil producers, right? And so that would be a big feature. Similarly, human capital, skills, education. These are like the two big categories. And then I guess as one more, technology is critical, particularly not so much being innovative ourselves, but being clever enough to adopt the right technologies at the right time.
Right. So all of that, the layout for looking at increasing productivity, which can help obviously get us to reverse things from where they are.
Yeah, I think the biggest implication is the cost of living, right? Yeah. It's one thing to play like a cat and mouse game where you're chasing a high cost of living by transferring money to households. The government will always have to do some of that. There's nothing.
It's like $500 checks.
There's nothing particularly wrong with that.
Right.
But a better long-term solution would be to increase productivity, which would increase wages and income.
Okay. AnnMarie Boudreau.
Yeah, so I
I'm doing well.
Excellent.
I agree with my colleagues. I think there's a laundry list of things that are certainly top of mind and should be top of mind. I think one of the things certainly that we're talking about and what we're hearing from our members is around the transparency piece of the conversation. I think there's a lot of really important conversations and a lot of promises being made as we're watching all of the parties out campaigning. As you say, when people are coming to your doorstep, that is a time to ask questions. And I think every Newfoundlander and Labradorian should be using those moments to educate themselves. And particularly, even around the cost of some of these promises. It is really important that we as a province think about how are we going to deliver some of these promises that are being made. And they sound really good. And our province and our economy could benefit from them. But how are we going to afford them? And are they going to be able to come through to fruition? I think that's really key. Another thing I think that's top of mind, certainly for our members in the Board of Trade, is around having a leader that's going to represent our province. Because as Jessica pointed out, we are in a critical election. And even though there is a bit of election fatigue happening, and a lot of people I think are choosing to just kind of step this one out, it's really important that they don't. Our province matters. There's a lot of national conversations happening right now, nation-building projects, one Canadian economy. This is not a time for Newfoundland to kind of recuse itself and kind of sit back and see what happens with things. We have significant opportunities here in our province, and we need a really strong voice who represents us on a national level and puts us apart and a player and a significant player in a lot of opportunities that we need to take advantage of. So I think that's really important, and we should be asking all of our leaders to do that and how they're going to do it.
I'm curious on the debt side of things, right? When you listen to the last number of years, at Muskrat Falls, there's talk of debt servicing, running of consistent deficits, right? Spending more than we're bringing in, but also this time of nation-building projects and dreaming big, and it takes money to do that. Granted, yes, hopefully outside investment and the federal government and everything, but what's the balance from an economist perspective of looking at servicing the debt compared to what I think politicians will call investing in the future and spending money for big projects? Like how much impact does the debt and servicing it have on us and our ability to do things?
Well, I think the big trade-off is, if you have a sufficient amount of debt that your debt servicing costs increase or perhaps your credit is downgraded, this will just make every other type of public service or investment you make more costly. Right. And so that in particular is going to, we tell a classic story when we teach introductory economics, right? That, if the government is too present in the economy, it kind of crowds out activity in the private sector, right, which may be more productive in the long run. Okay. And so there's a version of that here. So we kind of would worry that, if the government is spending too much money on debt servicing, that's less money for education. It's less money for infrastructure development. It's money you can't perhaps put towards maybe tax cuts or tax cuts for firms or something like this, right?
Okay. Any other thoughts on just this first round of where we're going looking ahead? Kelly, as a poli-sci prof, when there's debt, spending, policy, what are your thoughts on, especially as we are in this time of wondering, there's a big MOU out there for Churchill Falls, just thinking of the way forward?
So I don't have the same expertise as an economist in terms of the specifics here, but I guess one thing that I would say around this is, and maybe we'd have some debates around this. It's the question of how important are things like balanced budgets versus investment and so on. I think that the challenge, of course, and I'm not claiming to have expertise, but my sense is that all of these are things where voters tend to be very low information and not know much about these things. And so they don't make a lot of sense to them. And so there's a lot of sort of shortcuts, that I think they're looking for, and I don't know what the best way. I mean, Blair may have thoughts about this too. Is really just how do you make it easy for a voter to understand is a balanced budget the goal?
Yeah, this is where I am with it. Does it matter?
Right. And so I'm someone who says the balanced budget itself is not the goal, but the balance in terms of whether or not you're making policies, that the money's being spent in ways that will actually multiply within the economy. Again, I'm low-level, sort of first-year economics kind of thinking around these things, but that there are good ways and bad ways to spend money, and that we should be able to make the case that the way we spend it is good, that it's going to actually produce things like outcomes that we want, productivity, et cetera. And that we're not simply, because the challenge here, of course, you talked about giving out $500 checks. The challenge is that the government says this is an easy way to get votes, but this is bad public policy because we're giving this to everybody. For example, if they send out checks and I get one of them, I think it's a bad idea. I'm not the richest person in the province, but I don't need extra money, and I'm the sort of person who may even be able to save. I may put that money in the bank and it doesn't actually do anything. And so things like giving out money and trying to find the right balances, I think that that's what the challenge should be. If you're going to give out money, it should be to people who are going to spend that money and spend it right away. Those are the kind of areas of thinking. And so I think that when we get into things like just balance the budget as an easy shortcut, I think there's a much broader thing that's there. But again, I don't know what exactly to tell voters to say, this is the, if you're looking for one or two things, these are the things you should be looking for.
Yeah. I think it's a really important conversation and something to dig into more with voters, because I think governments and politicians certainly like to talk about our provincial budget like it's a household budget, and they're simply not comparable. But that's the way that we put it to voters a lot of the times. And I know in the last sitting of the House of Assembly, we had balanced budget legislation on the order paper. So something that is coming on the horizon. And of course, my concern always with balanced budget legislation is what happens when we're in a crisis where we need to, spend to support people maybe who have been put out of work, who are facing, the impacts of climate change in their community, and we have to make significant investments in public infrastructure. But there's not, I don't think, enough knowledge and information out there about what the implications are of some of these policy decisions, and our politicians just try to boil it down to, a soundbite that puts them in your shoes as a family that's trying to put together a budget. So what Blair has outlined is, I think, really helpful to break down some of what that means. But we need to talk about it more, I think, just in public discourse.
Yeah.
And
go ahead. Yeah.
No, Adam, I was just going to chime in and say, I think I agree with Jessica, certainly. And it's not balanced budget or else. I think there's a fiscal kind of strategy in the middle. As a province right now, we are spending $1 billion a year servicing debt, not paying off debt, just servicing debt. So when we think about that, when we think about our revenue sources as a province, when we think about how many Newfoundlanders and Labradorians actually pay taxes, we don't really have the income to be paying that out, $1 billion a year on servicing, while making really necessary investments in areas such as education and healthcare, which fundamentally seem to be the issues that politicians are hearing. Of course they are, on the doorstep. So we need to keep those things top of mind. They have to be priorities. So I think we need to look at it in the context. $1 billion going into servicing our debt is $1 billion that's not going into really critical other places.
So, and like with the MOU, if that were to be a deal with the current discussion around it, there was this talk of like $1 billion a year. And we're spending $1 billion a year servicing our debt, which brings me to just wondering, like, what, because you hear there's a conversation of what that money could be used for. And my curiosity is, can the money still be used for some of this discussion and promises? Because like you said, there's a lot. Each party's making promises almost every single day, compared to the paying down of the debt. And I know that would depend on the government and the priority. But does it, again, for the economist side of it, does it, like, how does that matter, right? Like, so do we have to service this debt? What happens if we don't service the debt?
I mean,
I know that's a dumb question, but this is where my brain is.
It's not dumb at all. It's actually kind of complex. I mean, at some point, yes, we'll have to pay back our debt. In a country like Canada, though, there are some different things, to consider. So one is, at some point, the federal government might have to step in and help us out with that. That's possible. I don't think that's likely, but I think it could happen down the road. The other thing is, in a country like, and again, this is more of a national issue, the central bank, and this is somewhat true for sure at the federal level, the central bank can always print money to cover some of these expenses, but the cost of that will be increased inflation, which I think everyone is extremely tired of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So those are sort of the two big end-of-the-road outcomes that are not really ideal. But I don't think it's unrealistic for provinces to have consistent deficits as long as the spending goes towards things that yield actual social returns, right? Education, infrastructure, physical capital, et cetera. Right? Okay. The issue comes when you accumulate debt or you run deficits in order to, as I say, eat it, right?
Right.
Just to consume. Yeah.
Just a quick point, too, that we are not that far away from Dwight Ball writing a letter to Justin Trudeau and saying we can't pay our bills. Now, I know they tried to diminish the purpose of that letter afterwards, but you don't write that letter unless it's true.
Yeah, you're not doing it because you're bored,
so we
right?
we have experienced, I would say, being on this brink that Blair is referring to a few years back. And we don't know exactly how close to the brink, but the idea that it wasn't actually at the brink, I think, is garbage. I think we were absolutely there, or the letter wouldn't have been written. So
this is why I'm so curious when we look at these potential deals, MOUs, and discussion around money coming in, where that money would actually go. But also, if you are kind of taking extra money to service down the debt, that would, from a deal, it could. I mean, that does free up some other money to be spent elsewhere, right? Because it's more money coming in. And now whether or not it's the best deal and what people think of it and whether or not it goes to a referendum and all these other questions are still obviously out there. I want to briefly go to a food conversation on food security. We've got Dan Rubin on the line, founding chairperson of the Food Producers Forum. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Adam. Thank you for inviting me to call in. I hope this is the right day. You have a really excellent panel there talking about important issues, some of them tangled up with dollar signs and somewhat abstract, but important. But I'd like to bring the conversation around election issues down to something basic, something that does have important economic dimensions, productivity dimensions, heritage dimensions, public health dimensions, and, of course, food security. And I'm one person who stopped using the phrase food security because it's too abstract. Generally, what we're talking about is food need, and the 30+% of us who are food insecure. And our group, our nonprofit group, Food Producers Forum, has been working on solutions rather than focusing on the problem, as you know, for the past 6-7 years. And most recently, a research team, a small team made up of Michael Murray of Murray's Garden Center and farming background, Merv Weisman, the former president of the Federation of Agriculture, Dr. Nick Fairbridge, a researcher at the School of Medicine, and I have spent a year and more looking at food policies at the municipal and provincial level. And there are some important ways in which towns and the province are stopping people from growing food. And as we found out in a survey that we did in 2022 that we called WTF, Where's the Food, 742 people who completed that survey that year produced 6.2 million pounds of food. So we reason that the solution to what people abstractly call food insecurity is local food production. So the phrase that I use is supply.
Yeah, Dan, but the other thing with food insecurity, it comes down to cost. I mean, there's enough food for people in this province, just that people can't afford it.
And part of that cost is the corporate structure that delivers the food from far away. Part of that is the burden of the cost of moving that food and preserving it and packaging it. But with respect to all those cost factors, local food has a promise of delivering better food, because the factor that's often ignored is food quality. But anyway, let me conclude by saying this, that the four of us have researched this and come up with a policy document of simple changes to 5 existing provincial acts that would help prevent the burden for regulating backyard gardens and livestock, lift that off of municipalities, because the municipalities do not have discretion, and they're operating based on policies grounded in language taken from a UK planning document published in 1947.
So are the parties responding to this at all?
Yes. In fact, we have met with the leaders of 2 of the parties, and we've passed the document on. And I want to encourage your listeners, as the election unfolds, to go to our website and read the policy document. Our website, as probably people know, is foodproducersforum.com, because on the main page there's a link to the policy document. And it's the carrot and the stick. The carrot is that we've shared these policies, easy to achieve, with all 3 political parties, and they're all enthusiastic about them so far, but we need the public to lean on them, particularly going into the election, and say, what about food? Because with those small policy changes, we would be able to do what the province has been trying to do is double food production. And that, in turn, will encourage new technology, greenhouses, hydroponics. It'll help us focus on food distribution. But if we don't clean house at the municipal level with these changes, we're not going to, people are being stopped from growing food. So I see that as an election issue that affects everybody, has economic dimensions, public health dimensions, heritage dimensions, sustainability dimensions, and climate change dimensions.
Dan Rubin.
So thanks for the chance.
Thank you very much.
Talk about it.
Cheers. Dan Rubin there, from the ground up, right? When we talk about election issues, food security, food insecurity, what we grow, the impacts of climate change. So this is something that Dan and the group you mentioned, right? They're advocating for. They've been doing it for years now. What comes to mind for me is, for any of you, are there any issues that you're not hearing enough about? That, for whether it's as an economist, a poli-sci prof, labor leader, or with the Board of Trade, is there something lately that you're like, you know what, I'd like to hear more on this from people on the campaign trail?
I'll jump in maybe.
Yeah.
One piece that I haven't heard enough of yet, and maybe there's more to come. We've still got a couple weeks left. Climate change. We've heard a little bit about it from the parties, and certainly some campaign announcements related to the response to wildfires. But we're coming off of summer of record temperatures, record number of heat warnings in Newfoundland and Labrador this past summer. The Federation of Labor, I think I was in here talking to Jen on the morning show during the summer about our heat stress work that we were doing. So getting out and talking to workers about how higher temperatures are impacting them in the workplace, and focusing on occupational health and safety, for example. But yeah, and we've also seen wildfires that have devastated communities in our province. So I do want to hear more from parties. What are their plans to tackle climate change? I don't think we can kind of move away from our net zero objectives. I think that there's a value for workers in terms of green jobs. I know, we saw some layoffs from ExxonMobil this week, and so there's a set of workers out there who could be transitioning to green economy jobs, and it's about health and safety from my perspective. We have people that work outside, people that work in manufacturing, who are dealing with the consequences of warmer temperatures in the summer, and then the public infrastructure issues that come with hurricanes and extreme weather and wildfires. But we haven't really heard a ton of detail from the parties on what their plans are with respect to climate change, save for some, promises around compensation and rebuilding efforts around the wildfires.
Yeah, like building for adaptation, building to shore up just the ability to be ready for what's coming. I also think I'm curious about a conversation around when we talk about the transition that has to happen for a lower carbon society. We always talk about what's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador, but the downstream, as they say in the industry, the oil that we sell, that there's no borders, right, for carbon pollution. And when we look at wildfires, when we look at higher temperatures, drought conditions, what we are selling has an impact. And I think I'm curious about the conversation that could be had with the leaders of the parties and everyone else in this province around all of that.
Yeah, well, and we have a tendency to lean heavily on mega projects in Newfoundland and Labrador, and there are some, I think, good opportunities, small and medium-sized renewable energy projects, community-based sustainability projects, energy retrofitting, solar. There's opportunity in wind here, so we don't necessarily need to put all our eggs in the mega projects basket all the time. And I'm not sure that has served us very well historically. But there's interesting things happening in Labrador, in other parts of Canada, internationally. And we should be looking to some of those examples and listening to our local experts and listening to the industry. I mean, it's not environmentalists that are a threat to workers who are in oil and gas. It's the industry itself that is making decisions that are having an impact on workers here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So how are we preparing for that? Not turning off the taps, but putting together a plan and having workers at the table to develop those plans with government and with industry to prepare for a greener future, and to make sure that we have good jobs in every industry in Newfoundland and Labrador, whether you're working in oil and gas or in wind to hydrogen or in solar, whatever.
Thoughts?
I agree with what Jessica said, so I'll give that thought for that. My additional thought, though, would certainly be around connectivity, and particularly Marine Atlantic. And that is our highway, that is our link to the rest of the country, and it is drastically under capacity right now. And that harms our economy, that harms things such as food security. It also directly is related to the cost of food across the province and every other product. And it also harms our economic growth and investment. And it is absolutely something that certainly people who are living on the island portion of our province, is impacted daily. We get our goods via Marine Atlantic. The majority of our goods, certainly anything perishable that you are consuming or purchasing for whether it's your personal life or your business, it is coming Marine Atlantic. And right now we don't have a service that is able to meet the service offering, which is stated in the Constitution and the terms of our union. It is to align with the service offering, and that isn't right now. And fundamentally, I would really certainly like to hear from our leaders and what they plan to do. We watched the Prime Minister earlier this summer stand on Prince Edward Island and say that we are making it easier, we are making it cheaper for goods to come and go from Prince Edward Island to the mainland of Atlantic Canada, because provincial politicians had advocated. And he joked during that announcement that PEI politicians, provincial politicians, had advocated so strongly that they weren't going to give it a rest until he did something. And I think we need to ask the exact same of our provincial politicians to be our voice. If we're talking one Canadian economy, we want to take our deserved, well-deserved place in the Canadian economy. The link to the rest of the country is critical.
Yeah, because they did a fares thing, but it wasn't about the goods and services.
We did a freeze.
Yeah.
We did not reduce the fees for Newfoundland and Labrador. And again, it isn't always about, we've done a lot of research, we've been having a lot of conversation with our members. The ask isn't even about fees right now, but it's give us space. Don't let us sit in North Sydney waiting to get product to Newfoundland where it's going bad, where time is being lost, where trucks are sitting still. That is lost time and lost money. And fundamentally, that comes down to the Newfoundland consumer.
Yeah, and also why vegetables show up like out of the cast of The Walking Dead sometimes.
Absolutely.
Jokes, folks, jokes. Any other thoughts from both of you?
I mean, I could go back to the environment, actually,
Yeah, sure.
as Jessica brought up. So it's obviously really important we get to like a net zero carbon at some point. This will be an important transition for the economy. However, I'm not surprised that there hasn't been a lot of chat about the environment in the election, because the trade-off between sort of the viability of the oil and gas and mining industries here in this province versus our environmental objectives is pretty considerable. I would say it's steep even, and I think people in the province at large recognize that a lot of the money in our economy really does come from oil and gas. A lot of money in government coffers, directly or indirectly, comes from oil and gas projects, and so I don't have a lot of positive thoughts about this actually, but I really do see it as a political challenge for the new government, is reconciling this at what cost are we willing to push towards zero carbon.
It's a huge challenge, and I don't disagree with you at all, Blair. And I think there are a lot of workers out there who had really high hopes for Bay du Nord moving forward and those jobs coming to fruition in Newfoundland and Labrador, particularly trades workers who are feeling pretty disappointed in where things are at right now, and they're skilled laborers who we want to keep in Newfoundland and Labrador because they contribute to our economy. They raise families here. They pay taxes here. They can go out to a restaurant for supper, and so we want to keep those folks in the province, but without a guarantee of those jobs. And the same goes for Churchill Falls MOU or any other project that's on the horizon. We have people here who are looking to work right now who don't have those opportunities.
Yeah. Oh, look, and so many unknowns. And then when you have uncertainty, and then like for example, I was in a conversation. It was a friend of mine's son is looking for apprentice work. Mm-hmm. Can't find it. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen? Is that person going to leave when they're here now and be like, hey, I'm good to go. Like, let's go ramp up with some of the stuff. But if that's still in the future and you've got the question mark on it, it's really hard to make some plans around it. We've got Mylène Vincent on the line, founder and CEO of Pivot Housing Solutions. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, thank you for having me join this great conversation.
Thanks for coming on the show. Been wanting to get you on for a while. Briefly tell us about Pivot, and then you're heading to Gander soon. Tell us about that.
Pivot Housing Solutions is a real estate development consulting company. So we're really developers, but we work with community housing providers, primarily nonprofits, as well as municipalities and levels of government in facilitating sustainable, inclusive housing and community development across Atlantic Canada.
And what will you be talking about in Gander? Yeah.
So, headed to Gander for the first conference, housing conference that we're having in a while in Newfoundland, Labrador. So the Newfoundland, Labrador Housing and Homelessness Network is hosting this conference in Gander. Hopefully we'll be seeing all of the community housing providers from across the province, and we'll be working to build the capacity of that severely underrepresented sector in Newfoundland, Labrador, and supporting new projects for coming online and letting them know exactly what that pathway looks like and how we can support them in moving those housing projects forward and increasing productivity, because we know that there's a causal relationship around the growth of the community housing sector and the growth of community housing stock and productivity of 6 to 9%.
So then, other than the fact we don't have enough homes in Newfoundland and Labrador, can you expand on that really, really boiled down thought to describe to us some of the issues that are here for your understanding of what is not working with housing in this province?
Yeah, I think Newfoundland Labrador is not super different from a lot of the other provinces in Canada, and certainly not from the other provinces across Atlantic Canada. There is this one big city, there's a bunch of medium-sized cities, and there's a lot of very small municipalities. And across the board, there's a real need for housing growth. But beyond that, we need to look at what the type of housing that's being developed. What I'm seeing through the platforms is a lot of discussions around encouraging developers, primarily private developers, in building more housing and increasing housing affordability. But what we've seen and what's been proven is that increasing housing stock, Economy 101 does not work, right? The growth of the stock has not reduced the property values. We need to look at the type of stock that's needed. Most of the communities are seeing seniors population or an aging population looking to sell their homes, but not being able to stay in community if they were to find something that was suitable. There's no suitable housing in their communities for them to age in place.
Yeah, this is why you get folks from like Lab West, leaving Lab West to come to St. John's, because there's nowhere that they could afford to downsize, which is, I've heard that in previous discussions I've had with municipalities.
Yeah, and we're hearing that a lot too. We heard as far as Happy Valley Goose Bay going to St. John's, which is an inordinate distance, right, to move away from community and try to build your own community in your senior years. That's not exactly what folks really want to be doing.
So then when you get here in Gander, you mentioned, so this is some of the issues we have with the housing situation in this province. You talked about some of the discussions. What's the forward momentum that you want to see, or that from these discussions that you're hoping for Newfoundland and Labrador?
I'm hoping to see some hope from the community housing sector, and maybe we'll be able to provide them some direction on how they might pursue some initiatives that they've been thinking about for some time. And hopefully we're working also with MNL, and we'll be at the MNL conference next month to speak to the municipalities and work with municipalities on planning their lands and finding really good governance models on how housing development can be diversified between market, affordable, different forms of tenure, between rent and ownership, but also have that governance model so we maintain that long-term affordability and encourage sustainable living for all Newfoundlanders.
Mylène Vincent, thank you so much for coming on the program. Thanks for having me. Have a great day. You too. All right, we've got, so everyone, keep your thoughts from housing. We're going to put a pin in those for a second, but we've got Shukrullah Zahiri on the line right now, who is a first-time voter who I wanted to get in touch with. Thank you for coming on the program. How are you?
Thank you so much, Adam, for inviting me to Signal Show. Thank you so much.
All right.
I'm feeling good.
Congrats on recently obtaining your Canadian citizenship, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
How does it feel to be? You're going to be a first-time voter, so tell me about your thoughts around what you're putting into voting.
Okay. First of all, thank you. As it was my first time to go to the voting section, and what matters most to me is that Canadians, including newcomers like myself, have a real voice in shaping the future. It feels incredible. I feel proud, grateful, and even emotional. Growing up as a refugee, my voice was limited, and I never had the chance to vote. Now, being in Canada, I finally feel like I have a real voice in shaping not only my own future, but also the future of the community that I now call home. I'm truly thankful to the government of Canada for giving me that opportunity. And I want a strong and the reliable leadership with the candidates who keep their promises and put people's daily struggle at the center of their priorities. That the election aren't just about the policies, as we know that they are about the building confidence that the government will listen, act fairly, and make decisions that strengthen our communities. For me, that means the real action on issues that affect everyone's life, from the cost of living to the quality of healthcare and the future of education. Yeah.
Cost of living, quality of healthcare, future of education. So then, as you've been here looking at party platforms, you mentioned how proud you were, but what was the process like of as you were getting to know candidates and the lay of the land politically for Newfoundland and Labrador since you've been here from Afghanistan 4 years ago?
It was like, as it says, totally different that in Afghanistan the election system is totally different, but we had a concern in Afghanistan that the biggest difference that was trust back home, that even when elections were announced, there was always uncertainty, that fear about the safety and doubt about whether the result would reflect the will of the people. But in Canada, I have confidence that the process is secure, transparent, and fair. I know my vote counts and the people's voice truly matters. The sense of the trust makes this experience completely different to me. Yeah.
Shukrullah Zahiri, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story and talking about voting for the first time. It's much appreciated.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Cheers. So we have Mylène there talking about the housing issue, but then also talking about kind of like demographics, right? And we've got Shukrullah there talking about being a newcomer to Canada and learning about voting and trust and everything else. Any thoughts on what's out there? Because for me, like I'm just thinking, I mean, there's the demographic issue of the province, and then you hear this really wonderful experience that someone's having around voting and the importance of it and thinking about it. So there's a lot there, but I think there's something for each of you to talk about, which is why you're here. What are your thoughts? Who wants to go first?
So I'll just jump in and say it is wonderful to hear somebody who is excited about democracy, because I think most of us are not.
Yeah.
And I don't think we recognize how important it is, and also how vulnerable it is. And so I wish there was an opportunity for all of us to kind of go back in time, or to transport ourselves to a point where we recognize that even though there's loads of us who are going to vote and we think our vote doesn't matter and what's really going to change and the parties are all the same, and a lot of the negativity that we can have around it, to recognize that we have agency here. We all have an opportunity. And even beyond voting, we all matter. We all have opportunities to do things, especially in a place like Newfoundland and Labrador. It does not take, I mean, again, there is a structure there, there is power dynamics, but it is not that hard to have an effect and to make a difference and to sort of work your way up, because the population is small and the opportunities exist for people. And so, and I've realized that I'm a middle-aged white male who's a professor who's saying all these things as though, oh, this is easy. I realize it's not easy, but I think that it is a mindset that people should move themselves toward, is to recognize what are the possibilities, what agency do I have, and what things can I do. And when I hear stories like that, to me, it's just a catalyst for thinking there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of things you could be doing. But a lot of us, I think, do get bogged down in how big it is and how many issues and so on. I think if we find our niches and we push forward, there's a lot that can be done. The
trust bit got me. I was like, trust in the system, trust, and like not picking out a party, not picking out something else, saying, no, I trust in the system and the process here. In a time when there's other shows, other conversations around people zagging away from democracy, and to your point, Professor Blidook, the fact that this is a small place and we have choices on what we do and where we go. And, just to hear from that is quite something. Any other thoughts?
Gosh, I came into this conversation today. AnnMarie and I were talking before the show started, and I feel like I was being pretty pessimistic about the election and maybe taking for granted, my own ability to influence the political parties. So I feel really moved by that caller and just thinking about the challenges facing newcomers to our province and how important those issues are and need to be reflected in platforms is so crucial. Not just the demographic challenges, but the opportunities that exist to build a really, vibrant community, one that is, meeting the cultural needs of the people who come to our province, but also the economic needs, finding good jobs and stability and security here in Canada. It's so important. So, I feel, my mood has kind of turned around after listening to that caller.
Mine too, actually. AnnMarie?
Yeah, just what a valuable perspective. Every Newfoundlander and Labradorian who chooses not to vote wouldn't they benefit from sitting down and hearing that perspective? Because he has the perspective of not having the right or the privilege of doing that. And he's not going to waste that right now. And he's happy to have it. And he has trust in the system that will get delivered and happy to exercise his voice. And I think we all should do that. I think it is so important that we not be complacent, especially in this moment, especially for this election. Everyone should go out and have their democratic voice heard.
What's the saying? Vote early, vote often. Blair, any thoughts?
I'll kind of stay on the same topic. It's really inspiring to hear that, I think. It's something that's pretty well, just to go really academic for a second, it's something that's becoming really well known in development economics, that, look, you can have quote-unquote good political institutions if you do not have a civic culture to support them, if you have low levels of trust in those institutions or in the society you live in general, nothing works well, right? And so again, my mood, I think, also is turned around a lot from hearing this. It's great.
Reminders are nice from time to time. And folks, as you're listening, if you have thoughts for us, the signal at cbc.ca. We've still got about 7 minutes left of the show. You can text us 709-327-8206. We're talking about election issues here on the signal today, whether it's stuff front and center or just things that are impacting or will impact Newfoundland and Labrador. And to stay with that demographic question for each of you as we look to what's coming in this province, the aging population, especially in rural Newfoundland and Labrador, from the housing side of it that Mylène was talking about to just development and trying to keep communities either the status quo or even imagining them thrive. What do we need to, what should we be thinking about and looking at, or what is it you're hearing, or what are your thoughts on that?
If I could just cycle back, because on your question about sort of what's missing, I think this is helpful too. So just from my own perspective, I think it was a couple days ago, and I was looking at the news, and I saw something along the lines of the Liberals are proposing to hire more police officers, and then just below that it was PCs are proposing to hire more police officers. And I was like, oh, that's cool, that's great, because they're both going to want. Sorry, there's no real option around these things, but I think that the broader issue for me, and it's not to say there should be more or less police officers, but there's a tendency, and this goes to the aging thing, it goes to the housing thing, I think to some extent to the food thing, is that, if everybody was getting cut or was worried about getting cut or was worried about getting injured, and the government came in and said, we're going to buy Band-Aids. We're going to buy Band-Aids for everybody. We're going to put Band-Aids on every corner, and you're going to get them in the mail, and there'll be Band-Aids. We would all say, why don't we do something about not getting injured as opposed to you handing out? And to me, that's the problem with that. And again, it's a simplistic, it goes back to the idea of just balanced budgets as your shortcut or whatever. It's an easy promise to say we're going to have more police, and people say, oh, well, that will make us all feel safer and more secure. But the truth is you're not really addressing anything of significance, which is what all these other issues are. And so I just wanted to sort of bring that back around and say I think that's one easy way that we often do miss things, is that I think with an aging population, people are concerned. I think police quite often is an easy promise. And I can understand why people would say, oh, more police, that would make sense. But I think that it is also sort of a blanket for, oh my goodness, there's a lot of things that we require police for because this has gone wrong or that has gone wrong. And to me, these are the other issues we should be looking at. And to me, there's a tendency for parties to really simplify their message down to these things and to not tell us how they're going to fix problems, give us a society that we want to live in, but just simply to say, well, we're going to put more police on the corner and hopefully that'll mean that you feel better. Yeah. So anyways, I know that doesn't really cover,
it touches on, like on the show yesterday with the panel, we had a vote voters panel, and something I mentioned that I've been thinking a lot about lately, it's that whole like forest for the trees, right? So are we talking about the forest, or are we talking about a tree? So if you're talking about police, well, that's a tree in a larger forest of the justice system. And I'm just looking at cbc.ca/NL right now. Here's another story that's been in the news today. NL can't have more cops without more prosecutors, says senior Crown lawyer. Forest, right? It's good. Well, those are two trees, but anyways, as you expand it, and I've done previous shows where we've talked about, and I've had lawyers in town talk about maybe we should have, not to have another accord, but like kind of like a justice accord, especially when you look at HMP, you look at all the issues with justice in this province, intimate partner violence, and so on and so forth. There's a big conversation to be had, but when it's a promise of one thing, Professor Blidook, yeah, it's kind of like, well, but what's the bigger issue?
And I'm going to add another tree.
Yes, please.
I think another important aspect of that, and I watched the same campaign promises getting made, there is an element too that if you step back, the RNC is currently recruiting. The RCMP is currently recruiting. We don't have people. So there is an element in terms of like, we need to recruit newcomers. We need to welcome new people to our community because we have really important jobs that we expect to be filled, that we need to be filled, and we don't have the people to do it. So that is an important element. Can I also answer your first question?
Yeah, of course. I love it when you answer my questions.
Sorry.
Go for it.
Kelly introduced this one by answering the question. You asked about what we should be doing. I think generally that there is a mantra I think that I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is, it applies lovely to the caller earlier around the backyard gardening. We can't be afraid of change.
Yeah.
We can't be afraid to embrace new things, new ways, new strategies. It's 2025. We can't do everything the way that we did it in 1980, or I think he referenced a document from 1940s. We just can't do that anymore. So we have fewer people. We have more machinery and technology. We need to embrace new ways of doing things so we can recognize the potential that we have and fundamentally meet the needs that we have.
Yeah. Also, to my mind, I started this week with a conversation around truth and reconciliation. And if we're thinking about how we do things, how we've done things, where things were written with people with wigs and everything else and colonialism, times change, conversations change.
How do we take care of each other? I think that's a great question to ask and try to get a little bit more in touch with our neighbors and build some closer connections. To go back to Kelly's point for a second on root causes versus Band-Aids. I think it was yesterday, Jimmy Pratt Foundation and Choices for Youth released a report on poverty in Newfoundland and Labrador, and the report said that 25% of children under 6 in Newfoundland and Labrador are living in poverty. That, should be the top headline, that we have, that many children living in poverty in this province. And it's not disconnected from the conversation around crime and addiction and the pressures on our healthcare system. So let's, think big and bold about how we tackle poverty in Newfoundland and Labrador, and not be afraid of change, as AnnMarie said, but to also try to do some radical thinking about grocery stores. Say we talked about grocery prices. I'm not saying this is the solution, but what if our provincial government was, delivering, offering people more affordable food? There are some interesting things that are happening in other places around groceries. So we need to start thinking bigger, I think, around some of these problems, and rather than just, I guess, going to the Band-Aid solution.
30 seconds left. Any final thoughts from anyone else? I'm looking at the two professors they obviously need more time than 30 seconds. Sorry, guys. Thank you so much. Any other final thought before we let things go with 30 seconds left?
Get out and vote.
Vote.
There we go.
Yeah, and talk to the candidates.
If you're not going to vote, have a very good reason.
All right. Blair, final thought before I let this go today?
I think I would just agree with everybody else,
Beautiful.
to be honest.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, folks, that is it for today's show. A couple late texts came in. I'll try to get at those tomorrow or for a show next week, because election coverage will continue here on The Signal. Looking ahead into the next week, we next Monday, we're live at Memorial University for a student show about the election. We're trying to do a show at Churchill Falls for next week. We've got a senior show we're planning, and also there's a special show for next Friday. So lots of election coverage about issues that impact folks in Newfoundland and Labrador. Do not miss these shows. For tomorrow, though, something completely different. It's the first Friday of the month, the time where we hit the pause button. 55 minutes of trivia for you tomorrow. John Gushu will be here and ready to quiz you. So if you want an escape from it all, tomorrow lunchtime on The Signal is for you. Thanks for listening. Cheers.